Peter wants to thank the Director of Music and Dance, Fred Cohen, the Dean of our College Humanities and the Arts, Lisa Wallendorf, and our Chair of our department, Janet Stemwetter. I want to introduce Peter. Now, actually, I asked him how much time do we have, because I could have spent 40% of it just introducing him, because he's an amazing person with just an astonishing experiences and talents. I want to just say something about some of them. He received his BA in music from UC Berkeley, but shifted to philosophy for his PhD, and he's been mulling over connections between music and philosophy ever since. He's published 2 books, one on the philosophy of Merleau-Ponty, and another, A Phenomenology of Love and Hate, which is, as we know, a very good book to be reading now, as well as many papers on philosophical subjects, some of them on the philosophy of music. Peter is, of course, far too modest about his gifts and accomplishments, in addition to those academic things. He's also an actor, a playwright, and a composer. As an actor and a playwright, he has, I'm going to just talk about some of the things he's done. A Friend to Nietzsche's Madness, which was a 1-act dramatization of Nietzsche. I got to be Nietzsche's mother that day, and I didn't completely screw it up. Several plays that were performed on Broadway and off-Broadway, and another that was performed in New York and at ACT here in San Francisco. In terms of his composition, I'm just touching on just some of them. He wrote the music for the Paul Mazursky film Willie and Phil, and he describes sort of waking up one day with sort of hearing it in the background. It's nice to be able to hear your work on TV. He performed, and these, again, I'm just touching some of his performances, with Professor Gwendolyn Mock, and they played Brahms' Liebeslieder 4-handed. He also acted out a fantasy interview with her in which she played an interviewer and he played Johannes Brahms. He and I got to do a lot of things together, and I give him credit for the creativity, the innovation, and I just kind of went along for the ride. I got to do, in addition to sort of being Nietzsche's mom, we did the leader of Friedrich Nietzsche and Rousseau's opera, Le Divan du Village, and we discovered that, yes, philosophers write music, and actually quite nice music. So, with no further ado, I'm now going to introduce Peter Hadreas.
Well, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very fortunate to be able to do this. And thank you, Rita. That's, as usual, flattering introduction. Something explosive happens with children in their second year or thereabouts. Up until that time, it's certainly speech. It's sometimes referred to as one-word expressions. It could be horsey, or it could be birdie, or it could be, of course, dada and mama. But around the age of 2, give or take some months, the child begins to do something that's altogether different, and that is to string together words. What's generally called as syntax. So you have, say, the, and you have animal, and then you put them together, and the is connected to animal, and animal is connected to the. And then you have plays, and you have music, and somehow plays becomes about music, and music becomes about plays. And then one can continue to interconnect, so we have the animal that plays music. Now you should have programs, and I'll never give up being a teacher. And so I have a chart in your programs that lists 5 developments in music that correspond, 5 developments in language that correspond to developments in music. I just mentioned actually stages 1 and 2. In stringing together words, stage 2 could certainly go the animal that plays music is the animal that speaks. Now I've connected together strings, and there is a kind of hierarchical structure. Now there's clearly something that seems similar in music if we consider certain basic chords like, all right, the first one seems to go with the second one, and then that third one goes with the fourth one, and sure enough, we can do something that is analogous in terms of putting those two combinations together and get all right. Now, I could extend it onward musically in a way that is somewhat comparable to extending things syntactically in language. Let me go very quickly through the next three stages, and then I will try my best to demonstrate at the piano. As the child begins to string words together, it becomes beholding to the child to observe certain kinds of grammatical structures. So though we say the animal that plays music, in other languages you might have animal the, music plays, and this would sound quite reasonable. So we move into a way in which, depending upon the language, it becomes grammatical. Now what happens in the third stage is indicated, around the age of 5 oftentimes with children, is that the words, and the child has accumulated a great deal of them by the age of 5, there's a matter of breaking language into parts. So a word like animal becomes something that the child is interested in and might start asking questions. Is a snail an animal? Is a clam an animal? Is my brother an animal? Is my sister an animal? And the word has almost an aura about it in that the child understands it could be connected in many ways. As we'll see, something like this happens in music. Then I'm pointing out a fourth stage, and my development of these stages, there's an internal logic. You need to have stage 1 before 2, before 3, before 4, etc. Once one has the capacity to take words, animal, music, and ask about them, then one can begin to have dialogue. So one could say, no, wait a minute, maybe the animal that plays music is not just our species. What about birds? They have beautiful bird songs sometimes. And then one answers back, but no, birds repeat bird song. And it's not playing music because we have a great deal of capacity to improvise and to connect up in many ways that is not keeping with repetitive use of musical-like sounds in bird song. Now, when I then can arrive at and say, so it is true that the animal that plays music is us, our species. That's after a dialogue, and that's the fifth stage that I'll recognize. Call it public speech. It has many forms. It can be a question of perhaps you have an argument with somebody, and it's a relationship, and you argue, and then you say, all right, it's over. Now, at that particular point, there is a manner of summary. It's public insofar as that pronouncement would have an action. I'll tell you what's rattling around in my brain, and this perhaps is, well, January 20th, our current 45th president said, I swear and affirm to preserve, protect,
and defend the Constitution of the United States. That is certainly public speech in the extreme. Now, there's going to be a correlate also with music. So the thesis, the theme of today's presentation is that those 5 stages, development of language, are recapitulated in music when music is particularly not constrained as a dance form, when it's not constrained as a song form, when it's extended, and there is something like a freer organization. Okay, I'll play first a piece by J.S. Bach. Musicologists like to, of course, be able to exactly refer to these. It is the BWV number 535. In fact, it is from Bach's earlier life, his so-called Weimar period. It is G minor prelude, and I'm playing it because of its free form, and of course Bach's genius is elemental to this as well. All right.
that's, now, in fact, the 5 stages, I've chosen that for reasons that I spoke to you about. But the 5 stages are very clearly indicated in that piece. In fact, the setting up of stage 1 and 2 is very clearly done with that tonal center, and it's connected, I will say syntactically, to this tonal center. That was the first section. When that's over, we get scales built on those tonalities. Etc. But now the third section, that's that repetitive on there is a series of chords that go through every single note of the scale, and I mean every possible note, every half-tone note. If these terms are familiar to you, the chromatic scale, it goes through. And the chord happens to be a chord which fits into many keys. So I'm saying that what Bach has done there corresponds to the breaking down of syntactic expression in having single words. In fact, this chord and this descending use of it takes us out of a key. It takes us out of the context. Just when I say the word, as when I say the word animal, we have a sense, but so what? I mean, animal, give us some other expression to connect with. So Bach has done that there. Now, as far as the 4th stage, which is dialogue or statement and response, it, in a sense, couldn't be more monumental, in my understanding, than Bach's expression of this. And I'm referring to this. Statement and answer, the monumentality is extraordinary. It's almost like we're hearing a conversation between gods. And so it goes to its end of the conversation, and then we arrive here. All right, that chord is different, right? It is the finale of the piece, and that's what I'm saying corresponds to well, public speech. It is ending it, but in fact, if we allow that there is some sort of conversation going on, or some manner of dialogue, almost as if it's celestial, then we have some statement, and it all is well. So this would correspond to stage 5. Now, in fact, the chords that are in that final section are the same ones that occurred at the beginning. And so, in a sense, Bach has taken us through this progression and then given us a judgment. Now, again, the theme here is that music does many, many things, of course, but one of the things it can do is recapitulate these stages. Now, to hopefully make this clear, I thought, well, come on now, try not to stick with the European music and its greatness, unquestionable greatness, whether it's Baroque, classical, and Romanticism. Go from another tradition and see if you can find the same thing. And so I thought, well, one of the stages is, after all, a statement of response or even call and response. This brings to mind gospel music. And this will certainly take us away from this tradition. And I also asked myself, don't watch out, because you might pick something that is in keeping with your theory, so pick something that's pretty middle of the road. So this is a very traditional gospel. You probably all heard it, and oh, happy day. And it is the arrangement by Edwin Hawkins for piano, but I'm sure you'll recognize it. And if what I'm talking about really has some weight, then we should find it in other places besides Bach. All right, so let's just go over that particular piece. I'll play it. Of course, this is piano transcription, but I think if you try, you can imagine choruses singing it. Now, this piece, I don't think there's much, well, on the piano perhaps it doesn't make so clear, but the call and response is the heart of it. As far as our level 1 and 2, of course it sets up the tonal center and the basic syntactic relations which are, but call and response, well, call, response, response, call, response, call. So there isn't much question, it's call and response. But what about 3? Because if we have this, well, I'm going to tell you what the final point of this is, why not start? That music tunes us up to being human, I want to say, is that the pun intended. Well, if it follows through this, well, what about stage 3? That's supposed to break it into parts. Well, there's one chord in this piece that I think is very expressive, and it's this one. Right there. That has a way of, well, it becomes somewhat expansive. And as a matter of fact, if you go by the notes in the scale, you wouldn't play that chord. It would be that's what fits if you stick in the scale. But this marvelous piece does this. Now I ask you to, they're pretty similar, right? But in fact, that chord is like it's like a skeleton key. It can go into other keys. It's not in the scale of the piece. It's actually built on, well, what are called whole tones. And it would be very easy to go from that chord to keys that are most distant from the chord of the piece. So, for example, there's the chord. Now I can go. Okay, that actually took us to the key that's most distant in our tonal tradition, to the first key. So what I'm saying that there actually is a stage 3 in this. And then what that chord does, it's like the word that opens up, and we're not sure where it's going to go, but it has a kind of aura to it. It could go lots of places. So the piece doesn't become quite as conventional, as traditional as we might think. It actually opens up to possible areas that are not exactly stated but implied. So that's what happens. I want to say that's stage 3 because it's breaking through the scales and the tonality. Stage 4 is obvious, and it's all about statement and response, or call and response. And then what about 5? Well, there's this marvelous way in which it's ended that those of you who are musicians here, you'll recognize it. Certainly it's standard for gospel, but the ending was is this just miraculous, almost, way of putting together the two main pillars of the piece, which are, how do you put them together? Well, you put this chord with this chord, and you get this. So in a sense, with just remarkable condensation, the 5th level is there in this rather complex chord. All right, now, one more piece. And this one, well, I wish me luck in this one. Anyway, I thought, well, let's go to a different period. We'll go to the Romantic period, and this is the Romantic period as it's understood in music generally. And there's a piece by Liszt. It's a Hungarian Rhapsody number 6. One of the things that's interesting about this piece is that Liszt is exploring non-traditional scales. So in a sense, it's breaking out of, or attempting to innovate, the major and minor. You've probably all heard of this. You hear of a symphony, it's going to be the symphony in A minor, or it's going to be the piano concerto in E flat major, major, minor with the various keys. But what Liszt is doing, as many musicians of his period did, is do they have to be in major and minor? One of the attempts was to put them together and have a major-minor mode, or a minor-major mode. And Liszt is doing this, and I'll try my best and play the piece and then explain to this. And of course, it is yet another, I think, quite different, but remarkable movement through, I can't say recollection, but what is our extraordinary gift that we have language. and what it's built on. Okay, so Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody, number 6. Now, this piece, as I say, it's actually architecturally very interesting in terms of building upon a certain theme and creating an immense structure. And it's particularly building on what is a major and minor combination, so that at the very beginning, we have this. And what you'd expect in the key would be but what we get is so instead of this, we get this. The scale that's being used there is not the standard either major or minor scale, it's a combination of major and minor. And so Liszt is very much aware of this and is actually pitting one against the other. So you go went by very quickly at the beginning, but even in the first movement, there's is it going to be this or is it going to be that? In fact, the first one, this, is this altered scale, and then this is the standard scale. Now what we'll see as we get to the last movement, that there actually is a conversation, almost a fight going on between these two scales, the traditional and the innovative, what is the conventional and in a sense the exotic, and Liszt puts one against the other back and forth. Now that's clearly our stage 4, we'll get to that. But what about 3? We certainly have 1 or 2. They couldn't be more boldly, I think, played than it's just, bam, huge introductory chords. But what about 3? That's the one where we take things out of context, we break it down to parts. Well, in the slower movement, the one that I appreciate because he marks it andante improvisator, and I can definitely use some improvisato, and I can definitely use some openings there. The way in which it ends is almost as if a curtain is placed over keys. What I'm referring to is this. There, and if you take that run apart, which I'm sure that the intention was to have just a shower, to have a kind of flow of notes which would just wash over you, but it's very far from Baroque. It's the same chords that Bach used in where he broke down the affiliation or the association to a tone. It's this. With this. One being every minor third, the other being every half note. And you can hear it. If I slow it down, you may be able to hear the two of them. The bottom one is the half tone and the top one is. So that, in so doing, he just kind of erases the blackboard. There's the decontextualization. And then we enter into the theme, this well-known theme, but he puts it in the exotic key as an answer. You hear the exoticism of it there. So it's going to go back and forth, and the octaves get to be more and more prevalent, but it's the same argument. And in a sense, it is, I think, teaching us something about what perhaps manners of thinking. It's about the old and the new. It's about the conservative and the innovative. It's about the traditional and the exotic. Republican and Democrat? No, forget that. Now, oops. So, that goes all the way through. Those hammering octaves are back and forth and back and forth. And again, he's telling us, is it going to be this or this? So when we have this, that chord is the regular scale. This chord is the exotic scale. So it's, do you want this or do you want this? Do you want the new or do you want the traditional? And back and forth. And then again, with this really remarkable innovativeness, it needs to come together. So what do we have at the end? Well, we certainly have more octaves, but the very end is these chromatic octaves. Right there, he's brought is it this or is it that to the very end, almost with a kind of furious sense to it. And what are they? They're taking the same business and centering it on these key of the piece. In other words, no longer two different places, but on the same place, so that we have, the exotic version becomes, and the traditional version is, so we get, do you want exotic or traditional? Do you want them both? I'm going to give them both to you on one big B-flat chord. Now, all right, so that's pretty much what I have to offer to you. I think this can be shown on many other pieces. We don't have to stick with ones that I presented. I have been going over how you can find it, interestingly, in John Cage, and I think there is something to be learned in the translation from the music back to the verbal life, because it tells us something about, as I say, this reflects the genius of our species, as it's sometimes called, our capacity to speak. It tells us how we're being human. So that music can teach us, can tell us something about being human, just the same as we can, of course, formulate this in words. Okay, so that's what I have to offer you. And I'm happy to take any questions you have about this. Well, then I think, are there questions? Yes, yes. Those three pieces. Well, partly because I either thought or imagined that I could play them. Also, I meant them to be from very different parts of the musical tradition. I became very interested in the list as I did some research along the lines of alternative scales. And it certainly wasn't only Liszt that was doing this, but many people of the Romantic period. As I'm sure you know, the paradigmatic case would be Wagner, Tristan and Isolde, where Wagner manages to move out of tonality by shifting it from one small phrase to the next, keeping on shifting it. Well, Liszt is actually playing with this, and many other composers as well. You can find this so-called minor-major scale in Schubert. You can find it in Rimsky-Korsakov. You can find it in Mahler. You can find it in actually, there is even some well-known Beethoven pieces where you find it. So many people have been working on this. I don't know if that answers your question. Yes? Yeah.
When you were at UC Berkeley, when you studied music,
yes,
did you strictly just stick to the piano, or were you just know how to play multiple instruments to incorporate to your philosophy?
At that time, there was a manner of teaching music. It was sometimes said in passing, you'd hear it in the hallway, music like little boys should be seen and not heard. We didn't. Our strong point was certainly not performance. There was nobody hired to teach us to play any instrument. As my dear friend who asked the first question knows, because she was a music student there at the same time I was, if you wanted to play or sing, you had to pay somebody privately for it. So it was about composition and musicology. And the idea of ethnomusicology had yet to be talked about. Extremely focused on European music within this particular period.
We actually need to finish up.
Oh, yes.
If you have any more questions, I think, can you hang around for a bit and take more questions
Sure,
from anyone
sure.
who has them?
Okay, well,
Right.
thank you.